So welcome to our accounts receivable practice questions. So ganito ang magiging mechanics ng ating practice questions na ito. If-flash ko po ang questions sa screen mo, gaya nito. Tapos, ipo-pause mo yung screen. Pag na-solve mo na ang problem, then play it again for the next questions. Sa solutions naman, ganito ang gagawin natin. So yan ang beginning balance natin ng the allowance for doubtful accounts. Tapos, ang sabi ng problem natin is, during the year, the accounts receivable of 35,000 were written off. So, ano ang effect ng write-off? So, isusulat ko lahat ng mga concepts na kakailanganin natin para ma-analyze natin yung question for each questions. Then, isusulat natin dito yung mga solutions. Halika, samahan mo akong mag-analyze ng accounts receivable practice questions. Alright, question number 1 tayo. Alright, the requirements on question number 1 is what amount should Aubrey report for accounts receivable before allowances for sales returned and uncollectible account at December 31st of the current year? Alright, so ang tinatanong is yung amount lang kung saan hindi natin i-deduct or i-minus yung allowances for sales returns and uncollectible account. Sa pag-solve ng problem na ito, you can solve the problems by using the T accounts. So kung mas sanay ka naman sa ganitong pag-solve ng problems, then kunin mo sa ganito. Then dito naman ang mga journal entries natin kung saan may effect ito sa ating accounts receivable. The following information relates to Aubrey Company's accounts receivable for the current year. Accounts receivable January 1st is our beginning balance ng ating accounts receivable account. Alright? So kasama yan sa ating solutions. Amounting to 650,000. Alright, second item is the credit sales for the year. So sa credit sales, ang entry natin is debit to accounts receivable and credit to sales. Alright? Ang effect niyan sa ating accounts receivable ay additions. So when you debit an accounts receivable, nag-a-add ka sa accounts receivable na yan. So we add credit sales. Amounting to 2,700,000. Another item is sales return for the year. So sa sales returns, ang entry natin is debit to sales return and credit to accounts receivable. So kapag ang transactions na yun ay nasa credit side ng iyong normal balance, minus yan sa ating accounts receivable. So we minus our sales return for the year of 75,000. Huwag kang malito sa sales return at allowance for sales return, okay? Sa sales return na ito ay actual na return na ng company. Yung allowance for sales return, yan pa yung mga estimated nila na pwedeng mag-return ng mga customers sa susunod na taon. Then another item is accounts written off during the year. 40,000. So sa write-off, ang entry natin is debit to allowance for uncollectible accounts and credit to accounts receivable. So nag-credit tayo na accounts receivable, ang effect niya sa ating T account, so minus yan. Alright? So we are going to minus our write-off, amounting to 40,000. Now, another item is collections from the customer during the year. Alright, amounting to 2,150,000. Our entry on the collections is debit to cash and then we credit to the accounts receivable. Siyempre, iaalisin na natin sa ating accounts receivable dahil nga nasingil na po natin yon. So, the effect on your T account is on the credit side. So, we will minus our collections. Alright, in the amount of 2,150,000. Another item is estimated future sales return at December 31st. Ang kailangan lang natin na amount is yung amount before the allowances for the sales returns in uncollectible accounts. So, ito lang po ang kasali sa ating solutions. So, our answer is, so we have an accounts receivable before allowances for sales returns in uncollectible accounts of 1,085,000. So, ang answer po natin ay letter C. Alright, question number 2. What is the requirement for question number 2? By what amount should OSF adjust its allowance for uncollectible accounts at year end? So, ang tinatanong dito, yung i-adjust natin sa allowance for uncollectible accounts. Let me give you an overview kung paano natin nako-compute yung ating bad debts expense. We have 3 methods of estimating the bad debts expense. So, yung bad debts expense na account ay parehas lang po yon sa uncollectible account expense. Parehas din lang yun sa doubtful account expense. Alright? Yung pare-parehas lang po ang ibig sabihin nun. Ito namang allowance for doubtful accounts, allowance for uncollectible account, allowance for bad debts, ay pare-parehas lang din po ang ibig sabihin nun. There are 3 methods para ma-estimate natin kung magkano ang bad debts expense ng isang company or magkano ang doubtful account expense or itong tinatawag na uncollectible account expense ng isang company. At itong tatlong method na ito ay, first, we have our aging of accounts receivable, percentage of accounts receivable, at ito nga pong percentage of our credit sales. Itong dalawang itong aging of accounts receivables at percentage of accounts receivable, yung makukuha nating amount dito sa aging of accounts receivable or the percentage of the accounts receivable, ito po yung desired ending balance ng allowance for doubtful account. Ito namang percentage of credit sales, yung amount na makukuha natin dito, yan na po yung bad debts expense natin. Alright? Na ina-add natin sa allowance for doubtful accounts para makuha natin yung ending balance ng allowance for doubtful accounts na ito. To solve this problem, pwede tayong gumamit ng T account or pwede tayong gumamit ng formula. Ang gagawin ko is the formula kasi mas sanay ako sa formula. OSF company has the following sales and accounts receivable balances prior to any adjustments at the year end. Credit sales of 10 million and accounts receivable of 3 million. And allowance for uncollectible accounts debit balance. Remember, debit balance itong problem na ito of 50,000. Alright? OSF company uses 3% of accounts receivable to determine its allowance for uncollectible accounts at year end. Okay, ang ginagamit niya is percentage of accounts receivable. So, yung makukuha nating percentage of accounts receivable, yan na po yung desired ending balance ng ating allowance for doubtful accounts. Alright? Yung account na ito, yan ang magiging ending balance natin. To solve this problem, mag-uumpisa tayo sa unadjusted balance ng ating allowance for uncollectible accounts. Ang allowance for doubtful accounts or allowance for uncollectible accounts normal side or normal balance is supposed to be on the credit side. Dito sa problem na ito ay debit balance ang ating allowance for uncollectible accounts. So, ang ibig sabihin, dahil nasa debit side ang balance niya, ima-minus natin yan. Now, ang sabi ng problem natin, OSF company uses 3% of accounts receivable to determine its allowance for uncollectible accounts at year end. So, ang ibig sabihin, itong ending natin, itong ending balance natin ng allowance for doubtful accounts ay 3% of the accounts receivable. Ang accounts receivable natin sa problem na ito is 3 million. So, 3 million multiplied by 3%, this is 90,000. Yan po ang dapat nating ending balance ng ating allowance for uncollectible accounts. Now, ang tinatanong ng problem is kung magkano yung i-adjust natin sa ating allowance for uncollectible accounts, yung adjustment. So magkano kung 50 ito at 90 ang ending balance natin, meron tayong 140,000 na i-adjust. At ano itong 140,000? Yan po ang ating bad debts expense. Alright? So our answer is letter D.